And now for the stigmatized varieties of English. First I'm going to talk about Ebonics, which is also known as African American Vernacular English or Black English. So why do we have so many different names for this same thing? Are they the same thing? Yes, they are. They all refer to this sort of urban variety spoken mostly by African Americans, but also by some white people or Hispanic people as well. And it turns out that what it's called depends on who you ask. So if you are asking people who actually speak the dialect, they will usually call it Ebonics or Black English. If you ask a linguist, they are more likely to call it African American Vernacular English. It just sounds fancier. And vernacular means basically a kind of language that is informal and used in conversational, kind of day-to-day type language. So what makes us say that this is a stigmatized language? Basically just because usually if you ask someone on the street, they will say that this language is associated with a lower socioeconomic class, being less educated, and also of course because African Americans have traditionally been sort of an ethnically stigmatized group in the United States. And because it's stigmatized, people will say that it's slang, that it's bad English, that it's lazy, that it's broken English, which is just absolutely not the case. It's not the same as standard American English, but it has its own grammatical rules, and it's just as systematic as any other variety of English or any other language. Okay, so there are some differences in this Black English in terms of phonology. One interesting one is consonant cluster reduction. So in cases where you have more than one consonant in a row, like in the word past, you have both the S and T at the end, it might be reduced to pass. Hold, hole, wind, win. So basically just reducing, deleting some consonants if there are several consonants in a row. This is a pretty common thing that we see among the world's languages. Another interesting phonological change is that interdental fricatives, these are sounds like th and th, like the word the and these. These sounds become labiodental fricatives like F and V, so truth might become truth, smooth might become smooth, or sometimes these interdental fricatives turn into alveolar stops, so troot or smood. There are a couple other phonological rules here that I'm not going to go over, but you can look at them on the PDF version if you're interested. Black English is really the most interesting to me in terms of its morphology and syntax. So they have, in some cases, what's known as B deletion, where B is being what's called a copula. So in standard American English, we would say he is fast, and in the Black English, you could say he fast, deleting that is. And is a form of B, so he fast. But you wouldn't do it in all cases. You wouldn't say who it instead of who is it. Basically, that's kind of complicated to explain why that is, but I just tell you that to show you that they're not just deleting, random words. It's actually based on rules and based on particular contexts and how you're using the word be, whether or not it gets deleted. So while you delete be in some cases you actually insert be. So for a habitual action, so instead of saying he runs all of the time, he runs habitually, you can just say he be running, which means that he runs all the time. Or we be learning, for we often learn things. And another interesting sort of syntactic quirk is that they allow multiple negation. So instead of nobody will do anything about that, you can say won't nobody do nothing about that. But again, this is systematic. It's not just, you can't just throw in negation wherever you want. You can't say ain't I never done that. You can only do it sort of in certain contexts. So there are definitely rules here that are at play, and lots of linguists have studied these rules. This Black English is probably the most different from standard American English of the dialects that we have in the United States, and there are a lot of speakers, and so it has been pretty well studied, and people have looked at the kinds of rules and processes that the speakers use. So where did this dialect come from? We're not really sure. The sort of most common theory, which you see in the film, is that it is related to times of slavery and all of the different African languages. But African American English today is influenced by a lot of languages, including our standard English, our standard written English, Chicano English, any other languages that speakers of Black English come into contact with. Alright, so Southern English. What is Southern English? Southern English is actually several different dialects, two main ones. There is the coastal Southern, and there is inland Southern, which is the variety of country music. And then there's also Texas English. Texas, of course, wants to have its own special dialect. Coastal Southern is centered in the Charleston, Richmond, Savannah area. These towns may be familiar because they were important during the Civil War. They're the plantation Southern dialect, and it's considered the prestigious variety down south. It is an R dropping dialect, so non-rhotic. They drop the R's at the ends of syllables, just like they do in Britain, which is probably related to it being perceived as a prestigious variety. They also have that distinctive drawl, and they have things that are called triphthongs. You know how we have diphthongs, where you have sort of two vowels squished together. Sometimes when you have R deletion, you'll end up with three vowels in a row. So instead of inquire, you could say inquire. It probably helps to be drawling to say that, because otherwise it's a lot of vowels to squeeze in there at the end of that word. The inland Southern dialect is heavily influenced by Appalachia, and in Appalachia, it's more conservative variety of English. It's more similar to older varieties of English, actually, including just in the words things like reckon. You don't hear reckon a lot these days unless you live in that area. Unlike the coastal varieties who drop their R's, they actually continue to pronounce their R's, so the rhotics, or R's, are pronounced at the ends of syllables. They also have something called the monophthongization of I. So the vowel in pie is just pronounced as pa, which is, one of those things that Northerners like me find very charming. So even though this is not really considered a prestigious dialect, it's one that people in general think is sort of pleasant or charming. They also, of course, have the slower speech rate than more northern varieties of English. And finally, Texas English, which is influenced by the other southern dialects and a lot of other immigrant languages. Texas has drawn a lot of immigrants. It's interesting for its pin-pen merger. Both of those words are pronounced as homophones, sort of like which and which. We have those two words that sound the same. Pin and pin, they would both be pronounced sort of like that. So you can't hear the difference between the two. And of course, George W. Bush, even though he was from the northeast part of the United States, when he moved to Texas, he adopted this accent. Alright, so one more lecture on this, dealing with New York English and a very cool study by Labov.